Some desperate parents are having their children abducted, taken against their will to a behavior modification program.
Every year, an estimated 120,000 to 200,000 American teens are sent to behavior modification programs. But behind the promises of rehabilitation, a sinister reality lurks. Thousands of these students report abuse, neglect, and mistreatment. Since 1976, over 300 have died in these programs, almost exclusively due to preventable causes. This is the untold story of the troubled teen industry. The sun had barely risen over the horizon when the vans pulled up to the house. Katherine Kubler, just 16 years old, was startled awake by the sound of heavy footsteps and loud voices. Before she could make sense of what was happening, two strangers burst into her room and told her she was coming with them. Confused and terrified, Katherine was pulled from her bed, handcuffed, and dragged out to the waiting van. As the vehicle sped away from her childhood home, Katherine had no idea that she was about to enter a world of abuse, manipulation, and neglect at the academy at Ivy Ridge. Upon arrival at the secluded campus, Katherine was stripped of her personal belongings, her identity reduced to a number. She was thrown into a strict regimen of marching, chores, and therapy sessions that more closely resembled interrogations. The staff members, led by the charismatic and manipulative headmaster, Dr. Marcus Thompson, screamed at the students, belittling them and breaking down their self-esteem. Katherine quickly learned that any form of disobedience or questioning was met with harsh punishments, including isolation in small padded rooms for hours or even days at a time. As the weeks turned into months, Katherine watched as her fellow students succumbed to the constant pressure and manipulation. Some became informants, reporting any infractions to the staff in exchange for small favors or privileges. Others simply shut down, their spirits broken by the unrelenting abuse. Katherine, however, refused to give in. She clung to the hope that one day she would escape Ivy Ridge and expose the truth about what was happening behind its closed doors. 2 years later, Katherine emerged from Ivy Ridge, battered and traumatized but determined to fight back. She soon discovered that she was not alone in her experience. As she connected with other survivors, a picture began to emerge of a vast network of so-called troubled teen facilities, all operating with little to no oversight or regulation. Stories of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse poured in from across the country, painting a horrifying picture of an industry that preyed on vulnerable youth and desperate families. Determined to bring about change, Katherine began to investigate the troubled teen industry. She pored over documents, tracked down former staff members, and interviewed experts in the fields of psychology, law, and cult studies. What she uncovered was a multi-billion-dollar business built on deception, manipulation, and abuse. Facilities like Ivy Ridge marketed themselves as therapeutic boarding schools, promising to help troubled teens turn their lives around. In reality, they operated more like cults, using isolation, sleep deprivation, and psychological manipulation to break down their students' defenses and maintain control. As Katherine searched more, she realized that the problems went beyond just a few bad actors. The entire troubled teen industry was rife with systemic issues, from lack of oversight to financial incentives that prioritized profits over the well-being of children. She met with lawyers and activists who had been fighting for years to bring attention to the issue, but had faced a wall of silence and indifference from politicians and the public. Undeterred, Katherine pressed on. She tracked down former Ivy Ridge staff members, some of whom had left the industry altogether, haunted by the things they had witnessed and participated in. Others remained true believers, insisting that the harsh methods used at the facility were necessary to help troubled teens. Katherine even confronted Dr. Thompson himself, now a prominent figure in the industry, but he dismissed her allegations as the ravings of a disgruntled former student. As the scope of the problem became clear, Katherine knew she needed to bring her story to a wider audience. She began work on a documentary titled The Program: Cons, Cults, and Kidnapping, pouring her heart and soul into the project. Katherine traveled across the country, interviewing dozens of survivors who had endured the horrors of Ivy Ridge and similar facilities. Each person she spoke with had their own harrowing tale of abuse, neglect, and manipulation, and Katherine made sure to capture every painful detail on film. Katherine's return to the now-abandoned Ivy Ridge campus was a haunting and emotionally charged experience. As she walked through the eerily silent halls, her camera lens captured the dilapidated remains of a once thriving institution. The peeling paint, broken furniture, and scattered debris stood in stark contrast to the polished facade that had once greeted unsuspecting families. Each empty room and corridor held the weight of the countless teenage lives that had been forever altered within these walls. The very same spaces that had once echoed with the sounds of suffering, fear, and despair now lay bare, a proof to the horrors that had taken place under the guise of therapy. As Katherine walked through the ghostly remains of Ivy Ridge, she could almost hear the echoes of her own screams and the cries of her fellow students, forever imprinted on the decaying walls. The documentary was not just a project for Katherine. It was a deeply personal mission to expose the truth and prevent others from experiencing the same trauma that had scarred her and so many others. Throughout the process, Katherine grappled with her own trauma and the weight of the responsibility she had taken on. There were moments when the pain of reliving her experiences threatened to overwhelm her, but she found strength in the community of survivors she had built. Together, they lifted each other up, providing support and encouragement as they worked to shed light on the dark underbelly of the troubled teen industry. As the documentary neared completion, Katherine knew that it was only the beginning of the fight. She had given a voice to the voiceless, but real change would require a sustained effort from lawmakers, advocates, and the public. She began to organize, rallying survivors and supporters to demand accountability and oversight for the troubled teen industry. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Katherine knew that she could not rest until places like Ivy Ridge were shut down for good. She had emerged from the depths of her own personal hell, determined to ensure that no other child would have to endure what she had. With each passing day, each new ally in the fight, Katherine felt a sense of purpose and hope grow within her. She had survived the unsurvivable, and now she would use her voice to protect others from the same fate. As the credits rolled on the documentary, the audience sat in stunned silence, processing the gravity of what they had just witnessed. For Katherine, it was a moment of catharsis, a chance to finally tell her story on her own terms. She knew that the battle was far from over, but as she looked out at the faces of her fellow survivors, she felt a sense of unity and strength that she had never known before. Together, they would continue to fight, to demand justice, and to build a world where no child would ever again be subjected to the horrors of places like Ivy Ridge.